Hi, I'm Ray Williams, your spinning instructor for the day. We set up in the patio a little bit of a fake spinning class along with materials I need to introduce myself. So this is an introduction to Ray Williams, the spinner, and to my spinning classes. So I'd like to start by talking about my background as a cyclist because 95% of what I know about spinning comes from my experience as a cyclist. So here we go. I'm going to talk about my cycling by introducing my bikes. Here's my first one. I think I can sit here and hold it, it's so light. This is kind of my trophy bike. It's my 13 and a half pound road bike, as you can see. It's a bit of a racing bike. I never actually raced with it. I basically have done easy rides with it and just enjoyed it. It's kind of like my fun bike. You can see it was built by Russ Denny, a small custom bike maker out here in Southern California. I think I said it was 13 and a half pounds maybe. So it's, I think, technically illegal in the Tour de France. So I didn't have any problem with that since I never came close to qualifying or even actually getting on a pro team since I started cycling pretty much as a middle-aged academic. So in any case, it's a fun bike that is part of introducing who I am. So I'm going to pass this along to my good friend Eric, who's helping us out with this YouTube, and then go on introducing myself by talking about the rest of my favorite bikes. Off to my right here is another custom-built bike. It's the opposite of that one. That one's very complex. Everything is light on that. Everything is flimsy. Everything is new, actually, when it was built, which was a few years ago. And this one is also a custom-made steel bike. It's a fixed gear bike. If you look at the bottom, you can see it's a fixie. And I've never actually ridden it other than for training, too. It wasn't part of any of my races. I did ride it once on an event, just for the heck of it, early in the season, about, I think it was 2007. Early in training for the year, I went to Paris-Brest, Paris. My first brevet, 120-mile brevet, was on this bike. I did it on flats. So I did a 120-mile brevet on that fixie, and that's all I've done on it for events. But it's been a great bike to get around on and to train on. Those of you that know exactly how fixies work, or that in spinning classes sometimes, I feel like I'm on a fixie because we don't stop, right? And that's exactly the idea with these fixies, is just keep spinning. So anyway, it's another kind of fun bike and trainer. Next bike down here is my Moots mountain bike. If you're a mountain biker, you might have heard of Moots. If you're not a mountain biker, you almost certainly haven't. You're not going to see them around town almost anywhere other than Leadville, Colorado, and a couple of places in other places in Colorado where they build them. It's actually meant to be a long distance bike. That's why you don't see them around that much. It's a titanium bike that I used for my 4 completions of the Leadville 100 mountain bike race. So that's an important piece of introducing myself as a cyclist. I started out in spinning classes training to do this Leadville 100 mountain bike race in the mid-90s. So that's what it is. It's relatively light for a mountain bike. It's not a technical bike. It's not a great mountain bike for technical stuff, say for example in California, but it's a great cross-country, long-distance mountain bike, and that's where it all started for me. Then behind me here, up on top, I've piled up my my Serrata. That's a bit of a weird bike too. All of these bikes are like a little bit weird. They're not your typical sort of Trek road bike. The one I piled on top there is the Serrata Titanium. Looks like a road bike, and it pretty much is. I use it as a road bike, except I've ridden it on a few events for what it really is. But in any case, as you can see, this is my, and I rode it across the United States. That's kind of what I wanted to bring up as far as my background as a cyclist. This cyclocross bike I actually is my all-purpose bike, so I feel like I can get over anything, anywhere, whether it's dirt, whether it's steep climbs, because it's got a huge mountain bike hog set in the back. So it's my cyclocross bike that most people would think is a road bike, unless you really know bikes. And I rode it across the U.S. with Pack Tour in, let's see, the year probably 2006 or 7, when we romped across the U.S. with Pack Tour in exactly 26 days. So we did the 3,000 something miles from Everett, Washington to the Maryland coast, the Atlantic coast, in 26 days. And so that's kind of like the legacy of that bike for me. And as I said, that's the bike I feel I can ride anywhere for anything. Okay, another one of my favorite bikes as far as riding a lot is this steel Serrata down below. So you can see I'm an old school cyclist. I still think good high quality steel is the best bike you can be on, and that's the case of this steel Serrata. It's a kind of an antique now, actually. It's a late 90s bike, so young cyclists look at it and think of it as an antique. In any case, it's, as I said, a high quality steel road bike, and it's the one I used for all my long distance events for the most part, unless I didn't know how much climbing there was going to be, and in which case I took the cyclocross bike with the huge cog set in the back, because that can climb anything. Anyway, this steel Serrata, as I said, is from the late 90s, and both of those were custom built for me, and the steel Serrata is the one I used for example, my longest long distance event was 750 miles, Montreal, Boston, and that's the bike that did that number. So as you cyclists know, once you do something with a bike, then you have this kind of special attachment to it. So I have that special attachment to my steel Serrata for having taken me those 750 miles or 1,200 kilometers from Boston up to the Montreal area and back. So that's that bike. Then over to my left here, I had to throw this in. This is a commuter bike that is actually the most ridden bike, I think, in the world. That's what I heard, and I think it's true given the population of China. They've been making these flying pigeons in China since the 1950s, and they still make them. I found this thing in LA. They sell them in Los Angeles, and I'm sure there are other importers around the US. It's basically your 1950s Schwinn clunker, basically, kind of bike. It's the heaviest bike I have. I think it weighs about 50 pounds. It's got this really cool light on it. As you can see, it's got a generator on the rim. Like I think the first time I ever saw a light on a bike, it had a generator like this. They're so low tech that they're high tech today, because who makes them other than the Chinese? So anyway, this is the bike of, you know, the Cuban, not the Cuban, but the Chinese Revolution. This is the bike of post-World War II that all the peasants rode to take all their commerce, all their agricultural products to the market daily. And so anyway, I consider it kind of a fun bike just because it's so weird. Look, it's got a bike stand in the back. It's standing on its bike stand. It's got a leather saddle, and so these are the bikes I actually put the miles on. I don't put a lot of miles on that. This clunker here, I kind of have to ride selectively around town because it doesn't climb real well. As I said, it's a 50-pounder. It doesn't shift much at all either, from what I remember. And so it's got like a bit of shifting quality. It's got these weird brakes. Those things underneath there are these low quality brakes that it has. So so that's my bikes, and I think that tells you as much as I want to say today about who I am as a cyclist, which is a huge piece. Like I said, I think it's 95% of who I am as a spinning instructor. I'm calculating, I didn't count every mile, that I have around 250,000 miles on total on these bikes, mostly these bikes, and a couple others that I might show to you later on. They're basically just older bikes, old Specialized, old this and that. So let's talk about spinning a little bit, because I promised that this YouTube would be about spinning, about myself as a spinning instructor mostly. I'd like to tell you about my spinning classes, and And so I'd like to begin by saying the first thing I tell my classes is that what's special about this spinning class is that we're going to practice active recovery. So I think as I start talking here, Eric can go ahead and start out with my typical kind of warm-up music that I like to have on when I begin a spinning class. And I have them warming up to this at 75, 85 RPM. If you can go ahead and get it on. And 75, 85 RPM, and with on the Kaiser bikes, the Kaiser spinning bikes that we use at the club where I'm currently teaching. That's on easy gears, 6 to 11. So on 6 to 11, we're spinning at 75, 85, which is what I'm doing right now. And I give my introduction to the class. I tell them that we're going to practice active recovery in the following way. We're going to keep ourselves moving, keep our legs moving at 90 RPM throughout the whole class, other than when we're doing some special kind of work that will require us to go below 90 RPM, namely when we're doing our jumps, it will be at 70s and 80s, and when we're doing our standing climbs, where we're going to be pretty much in our low 60s. So the active recovery component kind of guarantees a certain cardio level in the classes. We always practice active recovery in spinning because, after all, in what spinning class do you ever stop? That's the one no-no. All spinning classes, everyone keeps spinning in the whole class. Although I have to admit, I've seen some students almost stop in some classes. But in any case, in my classes, supposedly, we maintain, or at least the majority of my students maintain, an active recovery RPM of 90. So that's our first goal. Then, what I would say about the class is that I usually give them a little introduction to what we're going to do. So we're either going to do a series of exercises in a structured way, or I'm going to take them on a structured simulated ride. So if it's exercises, I'm typically going to say, because this is actually my formula, my most common formula is we're going to do today 3 sets of jumps, 3 sets of standing climbs, and 3 sets of intervals, that is sprints in the form of intervals. So that's the basic formula in my classes. The music can vary, the order can vary, but that's the minimal they're going to get from the class, which I feel has the advantage of guaranteeing they're going to get the most basic kinds of physical movement they need to train and practice their cycling on a stationary bike. My students say sometimes that my classes feel like a road ride. They feel like they're on a bike, and I think that's because of this sort of guaranteed fluidity of moving from one song to another through this series of first jumps, then sprints, and then standing climbs. We don't pause, we don't slow down, we don't do anything other than keep spinning at 90 RPM. So I ask the students to keep their eyes on their RPM as they drink their water. So we're hydrating up with our eye on that 90 RPM. So, like I said, I feel that guarantees fluidity, it guarantees a certain level of cardio workout, and it creates this effect that you're on a road ride. Because after all, when you're on a road bike, riding for 55 minutes, which is the time of the typical class that I teach in the club in which I'm employed, riding 55 minutes on a road bike is no big deal. As long as as soon as we get out of the urban areas, or we're on an event, or we're on a good training ride, of course, we can go 55 minutes or more, actually without stopping, and without slowing down that much if we're training. So that's my goal. Keep it spinning for 55 minutes at 90 RPM to make it something like a road ride. In the end, in my classes for 55 minutes typically turn out to be 22 miles. So that's kind of my standard, is I want to get 22 miles in. There's a lot of other stuff that I want to see happen that, depending on the individual class, we might have some goals concerning watts, we might have some goals concerning RPM, we might have some goals concerning, I don't actually ever have any goals concerning those calorie calculators, because I don't count calories, and I think it's fine if you want to count calories, as long as you believe that calorie counter is that accurate, which actually I don't. So we do about 22 miles, and I have some playlists. I have about 12 playlists right now. I've been actually teaching classes for as in late March of 2019. I've been teaching classes for 3 months. I think I've taught well over 100 classes in 3 months because I do 1 or 2 a day. But when in the playlist where we do a lot of sprints, like I have some in which we do actually six sets of these intervals. When we have playlists like that, I usually end up with about 24 to 26 miles total in the whole thing. So I'd like to finish this YouTube conversation about my classes. Now I have to take out my notes. Actually, I use these little things to have my playlist in there, so I occasionally refer to it to give people a heads up about where we're going. So in most cases, as we're finishing a song or an exercise, I'm going to give them a heads up about what the next thing is going to be. So today, I'm going to give you, in more professorial fashion, I'm going to pull this off and use this to give you some more information about my classes and my spinning classes, and that's going to be about it. I've got sort of 5 or 6 principles here I'd like to briefly peruse with you about my spinning classes, and then I think you'll have a good idea of what I do. By the way, the spinning bike that I'm on is a relic that I have around the house. It's about 10 or 15 years old. I used it fairly often when it was new, not so often today, but I find when I'm injured or coming out of illness, it's a handy thing to have around, and it's been very handy also for my partner. So between the two of us, even in the bad form that it is today as an antique, it's still a useful thing to have around. Like, for example, today when I want to have a little bit of a fake spinning class, it's nice to have around. So my 6 principles. The first one is that I actually believe the following motto. I'm sure you've heard it: no pleasure, no future. Maybe you haven't heard of it because you've heard of the counter motto, which is no pain, no gain. So I actually think no pain, no gain is nice if you're a weightlifter. It's nice if you're involved maybe in almost any other anaerobic type exercise. I'm sure there are plenty of athletic activities in which if there's no pain, there's no gain. But I don't actually think that's true at all in spinning or cycling. So based on my 25 years of experience as a cyclist, I've invented this one, and my years also in doing spinning bikes. My motto isn't no pain, no gain, rather it's no pleasure, no future. So what does that mean? I think if you're not actually gaining quite a bit of pleasure from a spinning class, you're probably not going to last very long. You can make it miserable if you want by using high gears, and you can simulate anaerobic exercise and go into great pain like a weightlifter. And you probably will expand some muscles in your legs mostly. But I think what you really need to be doing is pushing yourself daily to that point, of course, in which you have some adrenaline flow, in which you have some dopamine flow, in which you're gaining considerable pleasure out of pushing your limits, but just to the limits by the end of the 55-minute class, so that you have positive muscle memory and actually want to repeat this. You actually look forward to the next time you come to class, and you still look forward to it the next morning. You're not actually in great muscle pain the next morning. And actually, I think it's more important to control exactly how much you're going to push yourself every day. So know your limits so that you're actually able to do this 3 to 6 days a week. That was my recipe as a long-distance cyclist. I was on a bike 6-7 days a week because I was never going to go in any particular day into some anaerobic state that required 2 to 3 days of recovery, as happens in some other disciplines, like in weightlifting. So that's my first principle: no pleasure, no future. I don't think you have a future as a cyclist if I put you into great pain, so I'm not going to put you into pain. So principle number 2 is that
My spinning classes are very music driven, as I'm sure you know if you have any experience with spinning classes at all. The music is key. We tend to like or dislike a class according to how much we like or dislike the music, and with that we associate, of course, with the instructor. I don't actually play necessarily music that is my personal favorite music. I do only have one requirement. I have to like the music, but I have to like music that represents a mix of what everybody likes. So among the music styles that we find from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s, I select the stuff that I like, that I also think works in spinning classes. It has consequently not a lot to do with the music I happen to like to listen to per se. So I don't have a lot. I'm going to tell you, I have very little kind of just electronic driven music. Probably 1 out of 100 songs that I play in my classes are what you would call high-tech electronic music. The classes, I feel, is once I accept that I do need music that drives, that makes people want to keep working and move into the next song and actually want to stay in class longer when we get to the end. Once we accept that, then the other piece that I feel is really important in a spinning class is a sort of building structure in the class, that we're building toward more things, that we're actually moving along from week to week, from one thing to another. In a large club, such as the one where I teach right now in March of 2019, that's a little difficult because we have a lot of people that show up randomly. We have a small group of people that show up regularly and a large group that show up randomly. But within those limits, I try to do what I can do with sort of building on things, building on how we do standing climbs, building on the length of our intervals and things of that sort. A basic principle that some students have told me they recognize, they say, I like the way the music varies, and I think what they're saying is they're recognizing that I tend to go back and forth from very fast things with very rigorous sprinting type exercises mixed in with jumps and standing climbs. So I go back and forth, back and forth. We're not going to have, like, for example, 3 songs in a row that are going to be sprints. On the other hand, since it's cycling and not Zumba, for example, I do try to keep us in certain movements long enough to actually do some muscle work. So, whereas in Zumba we never stay anywhere more than a few seconds, and in my spinning classes I try to keep us in things at least 20 seconds, but for the most part we stay at things for a full song, like a full song of jumps, a full song of standing climbs, or which is talking about 3 to 4 minutes, right? So, my fourth principle, I've only 4 of the 6 and I'm done for today, is that I don't do any non-cycling frills, and that's one of the reasons I introduced myself first as a cyclist. I only do in the spinning classes what I have done and am doing as a cyclist. So I don't do, for example, I'm not going to bring little weights in and do this. This is nice for the classes in which they do that. And it might be also nice if if this is the only workout you're going to have all day, you're going to get this cardio and you're going to get this weightlifting. So, more power to the people that teach classes like that. But I don't do that because I'm teaching indoor cycling and it's cycling driven. So we just do what we do on bikes. That's my simplest explanation for that. And so, and I don't really do any of the frills that don't have anything at all to do with training. This has to do with training. It has to do with actually anaerobic training. There are some frills that show up sometimes in spinning classes that don't actually have a training function at all. So I don't do those. I think they're interesting. But if we're only going to have 55 minutes to work out, I want to work out in some biking way. That is, for example, I've seen in spinning classes somebody take one handle the way we do on a bicycle. This is actually very easy on a spinning bike, not quite as easy on a bike. Because as I ride along like this with one hand on the handlebar, I'm in a little bit of danger. If I hit a pothole or a larger rock, I'm going to fall over like this. If I have both hands on it, I still might fall over if I hit a pothole or a larger rock, but I have a much better chance. I think at least 1,000 times in my cycling career, because I have both hands on the handlebars, as most cyclists do, when I have these unfortunate situations where I run into a pothole or a rock I haven't seen, most of the time I haven't fallen over. So I don't actually think it's a good thing to teach spinning people to ride with one hand and their hand behind their back. It's kind of cute, you know. I've seen this one too, like this. But we would never do this on a bike. There's no training function to this. There's not even any practice function, because if you're on a bike, this isn't the hard part. The hard part is actually balancing with this one hand, which you have to do when you're picking up your water bottle, for example. So there is some practice to this if you're on a bike, but I don't really see the practice function if I'm on a spinning bike, because you know there's no balance issue here. So anyway, so I sort of skipped the frills and the cutesy stuff that you might see in some spinning classes. If you give me 2 hours, we'd do some of that, just as kind of a rest, actually. So the last thing I wanted to say is that when I'm doing things like the intervals, for example, I try to also vary those things as a part of just the variation of the class, because I think the variation of the variety of the music and the variety of exercises is what keeps us interested, while at the same time the length of those exercises is essential to the training. So I try to balance those two things out. So that's pretty much what I have for my introduction to spinning, and so I think with that we'll go ahead and finish this call to an end. This second YouTube claim finished our second YouTube introducing my spinning classes. I'm Raymond Dale Williams, and I thank you for your time.